Discussion at the table with your guests. For those of you joining us now via live stream, good afternoon and welcome to the CEDA 2020 State of the State Address to be delivered by CEDA's Premier, that'd be nice, by Queensland's Premier, the Honourable Anastasia Palaszczuk MP. Today's hybrid event with us in Brisbane and you around the country and around the state is supported by PwC Australia, Siemens, the University of Queensland and supporting sponsors Colin Biggers and Paisley Lawyers and Westpac. We've welcomed our guests, we've acknowledged traditional owners of the land and reiterated our commitment to them and our support for their stated aspirations as stated in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Wherever you're tuning in to us from today, you're joining us from Aboriginal land. If you'd like to participate in the Q&A session today for guests in the room, those details will come back up on screen for you shortly. And if you're viewing, slide down your screen and enter the details in there. Now to formally introduce the Premier of Queensland, it's my pleasure to welcome to the CEDA stage a long friend of CEDA in her previous roles and a returnee to Queensland, the Vice-Chancellor of the University and President of the University of Queensland, relatively new to that role, Professor Deborah Terry AO. Please make her feel welcome.
Thank you very much, Clint, and good afternoon, everyone. I also acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet today and pay my deep respects to their elders, past and present. I'd like to acknowledge the Premier, the Honourable Anastasia Palaszczuk, as well as her parliamentary colleagues and the many distinguished guests who are with us here today. I also want to pay tribute to you, Clint, and to the CEDA team for how you've moved so quickly and effectively to live stream these events. But I think I speak for all of us who are here physically today when I say it's a privilege to return to a room that's full of people engaging in a debate around public policy, although it still feels a little odd to be so distant from our table mates. I'm only in my third week as UQ's Vice-Chancellor, having just returned to Queensland after spending the past 6 years in the West. So I've lived in 2 states this year where the response to the pandemic has been exceptional. While there's always an element of luck when you're battling an uncertain threat like COVID-19, I also believe that you have to make your own luck. As Queenslanders, we've had a distinct advantage in the fight against COVID-19 because this state boasts world-leading research institutions with deep expertise in health, medical research and life sciences. This expertise has been hard to miss over recent months. Our researchers from UQ and right across Queensland have been visible in the media on a daily basis, offering advice to a community that's hungry for accurate information about the virus. As a result, the community has become familiar with what were previously more obscure scientific pursuits like epidemiology, virology and vaccine technology. And it's this expertise that has helped to influence our community's positive response to COVID restrictions. Leadership has also been an extremely important factor in Queensland's success in suppressing the virus. We've been very fortunate to have had a government that has not only acted on the very best health and scientific advice, but one that has also invested in that advice. And on this point, I particularly want to acknowledge the Queensland Government for its $10 million contribution to help fast-track the development of UQ's COVID-19 vaccine. Of course, it's too early to claim victory, but the results so far are looking very promising, and that should give us all a sense of hope that we will recover from this pandemic. On this note, as a sector, we look forward to collaborating closely with the state government and with industry to support our economic recovery through our research and innovation and by delivering the graduate labour force required for the future. I'm sure that the Premier will want to expand on this theme of recovery in her speech today. Which brings me to my main role here, which is to do the formal introductions. Moderating today's discussion is Chris Rogan, who is a partner at PwC. Chris will join the Premier on stage straight after her speech. But it's now my great privilege to invite to the stage the Honourable Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Queensland Premier and Minister for Trade, to deliver the 2020 State of the State address. A UQ graduate, Ms Palaszczuk was the recipient of a British Council scholarship which enabled her to study for a year in London at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies and the London School of Economics. She's represented Inala in our state parliament since 2006, and she was officially sworn in as Queensland's Premier in February 2015, and her government was re-elected in 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in offering a very warm welcome to our Premier, the Honourable Anastasia Palaszczuk. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we gather and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. To Mr Clint O'Brien, Associate Director, Programming and Innovation, CEDA, to the Honourable Stephen Miles, Deputy Premier and Minister for Health and Minister for Ambulance Services, to all of my Cabinet Ministers that are here with us, either in person or online, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, next Wednesday, my friend Jeff Horn fights Tim Tszyu for the Australian and global super welterweight title in Townsville. I know, not exactly the beginning you were expecting. My great-grandfather used to sit on his front steps and listen to the boxing on his radio. I don't have that level of dedication to the sport, but I am a big fan of Jeff Horn. I admire his courage. And if Jeff was here now, I'm sure he would tell you it's not the ability to fight that matters, but the belief in yourself. Muhammad Ali said, it's that ability to reach down and find something within yourself to keep going. Put it another way, it's not how many times you get knocked down that matters, it's how many times you get back up again. And that's where we are all at the moment, dealing with the confronting twin crises, the health crisis and the resulting economic crisis, as a state, as a nation, as a planet. We've been felled by an opponent which is microscopic, and not just in Queensland, but in every state of the nation and every country across our globe. The question all of us are asking is, how do we get back up again? Just as we need a roadmap for our health recovery, we need a strong plan for our economic recovery. Today, I'm presenting our economic recovery plan to bring Queensland's economy back better than it was before the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to see us come out the other side with an economy growing faster than the rest of the nation. COVID has taught us that our economic recovery must be driven by Queensland for Queenslanders. Businesses are changing the way they operate because they have to, because all of our lives have been impacted and changed. That's why we can't just build the economy back to the way it was before. We have to build it back better. Sure, it's very challenging, but it also brings incredible opportunity. Queensland's economic recovery plan has been developed to respond to a set of conditions never before seen in our lifetime. And it's a strong plan that depends on Queenslanders working together and looking out for each other, just as Queenslanders have done, responding to cyclones, to floods, to bushfires, and indeed perhaps more so than ever during this pandemic. Working together is what has made us resilient. It's what has made our disaster management systems world-class. The COVID-19 pandemic has taught us never to let down our guard, and we see that again just today. Overnight, we have been rapidly dealing with 2 new cases of coronavirus affecting southeast Queensland. You can never be sure where this disease will rear its head, and this shows we are not out of the woods yet. Queensland's response to the COVID-19 pandemic started when our Chief Health Officer spotted the risk of coronavirus while it was still 7,000 kilometres away. The State Health Emergency Centre was activated weeks before our first case. Fever clinics attached to major hospitals were established before they were needed. Plans were made to free up hospital space before it was needed. Plans were made to create even more hospital space at the showgrounds for the first time since the Spanish flu pandemic of 1919. On January 29, less than a month after the first cases emerged in Wuhan, Queensland declared a public health emergency. Our Disaster Management Committee met and I called for the need for national action. We undertook and continue to undertake detailed scenario testing and continual testing of our systems to ensure we have the rapid contract chasing capability. We summoned industry leaders in tourism, in logistics, in freight, in higher education, in manufacturing, agriculture and fishing, and on February 18 announced our initial $27 million assistance package. That has since grown to $6 billion. But more about that in a moment. We've made difficult decisions, hard decisions, often contentious decisions. Our borders closed for the same reason our international borders closed, so that we could stop importing the disease. There are now more active cases in aged care in Victoria than Queensland has had during the entire pandemic. Every Queenslander, all 5 million of them, have played a crucial role in that, and each of them deserve our praise and our heartfelt thanks for helping us to stop COVID. And yet, it's Queensland that is attacked. I'll cop whatever gets thrown at me, that's politics. But I won't stand by while the work and sacrifices Queenslanders are still making are attacked. I will continue to do everything I can to protect Queenslanders against this disease and against criticism, and we will continue to be guided by the best health advice. It's only very recently that 3 young women broke the rules and brought this disease back into Queensland. That was extremely disappointing. But what followed has been truly inspiring. Thousands of Queenslanders fronted up for testing. That's how Queenslanders feel about COVID. No one is hiding under the doona. Queenslanders got out to protect their schools, their small businesses and their communities by being tested. So we know we can count on Queenslanders to do the right thing. And it's clear to me the Queensland economy can only open because our borders are closed. That's evidenced by the thousands who embraced the Good to Go campaign, encouraging Queenslanders to get out and support Queensland hospitality and tourism. Treasury estimates lifting stage 3 restrictions is supporting $520 million worth of economic output each month and an additional 50,000 jobs. Since the easing of restrictions, there are 66,800 more jobs in Queensland from May to July. This has led to the participation rate recovering, which means more Queenslanders are trying to get back into the workforce. And the latest Seek Job Ads data for August shows Queensland job ads ahead of New South Wales. But we still have a long way to go. Prior to COVID, Queensland's economy was growing faster than the national average, and my government had delivered 5 consecutive budget surpluses. That strong economic position prior to COVID-19 positioned Queensland with the fiscal capacity to act quickly. The global shutdown of the tourism and international study industries have hit us really hard. We still have 138,000 fewer jobs than prior to the pandemic, but we have planned a way forward. Our $51.8 billion infrastructure plan, including $13.9 billion over the next year, has been developed in consultation with business and industry and supports 44,000 jobs. Today, the Treasurer is releasing a Capital Program 2020 update so that industry can plan for our infrastructure pipeline. By comparison, the federal government's national infrastructure plan is $100 billion over 10 years for the entire nation. The 6 key priorities of my government's economic recovery plan are clear and concise. 1, we must safeguard Queenslanders' health so that we remain pandemic ready and build community resilience. But crucially, by doing that, we can keep the economy open. 2, we must back small business by buying local, by increasing skills and capability, and by making it easier to do business here in Queensland. 3, we are committed to making it for Queensland, attracting manufacturers to our state and powering regional development. 4, my government is committed to building Queensland's infrastructure, as I've already outlined. 5, we are committed to growing our regions with regional partnerships and by delivering critical new energy and water projects, and businesses will create exports. And 6, we are investing in skills by encouraging apprenticeships and creating pathways for young Queenslanders. It's a plan that will support 55,000 jobs over the next year through direct infrastructure investment and by unlocking private investment. And it builds on our immediate response that has supported businesses to keep 334,000 Queenslanders in jobs. Friends, as we focus on our economic recovery and navigate the pathway out of this pandemic, my government has provided unprecedented support for business, including $1.3 billion in payroll tax relief, $1 billion in concessional loans, $200 million in grants and $100 million in electricity rebates. This has helped business not only survive this unprecedented set of circumstances, it has helped them change the way they do business. Take Steve and Debbie Burns, who run Queensland's oldest pub near St George, to father and son watchmakers Bob and Grant in Brisbane, who have been running their business for 50 years, to Nick and Ivy Dos Santos supplying coral for aquariums out of Mackay. Our concessional loans have helped 7,000 Queensland businesses. In Cairns, our COVID loans have supported Lyle Squire Jr., the Director of Cairns Marine, to keep operating as one of the largest suppliers of marine life for aquariums. On the Gold Coast, our COVID loans have supported coffee club owners, Karen and Jason, to get their businesses through COVID and brew coffees as restrictions have eased from their Stockland Burleigh store. Shannon Hawkes at Artisan Florals had to close her doors because of COVID, but was able to reopen with the support from our $500 electricity rebate. Restaurants and cafes and pubs like Santini's at Harvey Bay were able to welcome back customers and keep their businesses running after receiving one of our small business COVID-19 grants. And it was Maryborough RSL's commitment to 80 staff and the local community that was at the front of President Paul Coleman's mind during the pandemic and meant the club was able to reopen after COVID-19 restrictions lifted with the help of one of our COVID job supports loans. Building and construction will also be a pillar of our recovery. Our tradies want to work and we intend to give them plenty of work to do. Our construction sector employs nearly 1 in 10 Queenslanders. We've extended our $15,000 first homeowners grant for new builds, and we've added $5,000 for new homes in regional Queensland. We've provided $10 million for our seniors and people with disabilities to get up to $5,000 worth of vital maintenance done around their homes. That provides real, tangible outcomes for builders like Wade and Natasha, who I met last month on site at Spring Mountain, where they are building new homes and now see more work coming, which will allow them to put on a second apprentice. There's $200 million for a Works for Queensland program so that local councils across the state can deliver 520 local projects providing more than 4,600 jobs. And our economic response includes more than $800 million for new road projects, in addition to more than $760 million for new schools, expansion and vital school maintenance. In that regard, and critical to our recovery, is the provision of a skilled workforce. Many younger Queenslanders have lost their jobs during this pandemic. We must take care of them and we must help guide their future. That's why we've extended Skilling Queenslanders for Work, delivering a new $10 million Reef Assist program and a $20,000 boost for employers taking on a trainee or apprentice. My government is matching the federal government's $100 million skills package to support Queenslanders into training places. Friends, our agricultural and resources industries here in Queensland are acting as economic stabilisers. Queensland exports of goods at $77.4 billion remain higher than New South Wales and Victoria combined. To support our agricultural sector, our economy plan includes $1.2 billion in water infrastructure projects supporting 2,300 jobs, $5 million for our wild dog fencing out west and pest management to support our sheep industry to come back even stronger. The resources sector is one of Queensland's greatest strengths. Queensland remains the largest seaborne exporter of metallurgical coal in the world, used in steel furnaces throughout Northeast Asia. And we now have an LNG export industry rivalling Qatar. I am proud of our record facilitating $20 billion worth of investment decisions in resources, meaning more than 7,000 jobs. And I want to recognise the constructive approach the resources sector has taken to quickly implement COVID-safe industry plans to protect workers while keeping our critical supply chains open. To further support resource companies, we've provided an additional $10 million for exploration for the new economy minerals such as cobalt and vanadium. I also want a clear focus to see manufacturing expanding here in Queensland. To do this, we need cheaper and cleaner energy. My government's 50% renewable energy target has been critical to delivering the lowest wholesale energy prices on the East Coast. It has supported $6.6 billion of investment in solar and wind farms and 5,700 construction jobs over the past 5 years, taking Queensland's renewable energy generation to 20% by the end of the year, compared to just 7% when we first came to government. At this point, I do have to remind everyone here that the LNP went to the last election committing to scrap the 50% renewable energy target, claiming it would drive up prices and that it would kill jobs. And what we have seen is the exact opposite. We have around 600,000 homes with rooftop solar, producing more power than Queensland's largest coal-fired power station. And we are rolling out 180,000 solar panels on our schools. And today I can confirm the next steps my government will be taking under our economic recovery plan to continue to drive new investment in renewable energy and manufacturing. An investment that will take our commitments for the economic recovery to more than $7 billion. Today I'm announcing my government will deliver another $145 million to unlock 3 Queensland renewable energy corridors across Queensland: North Queensland, Central Queensland and South West Queensland. We will map out areas within Queensland for investment in renewables, solar and wind, by supporting the delivery of transmission infrastructure. In North Queensland, there's potential for up to 5 renewable energy zones, from Cairns down to Townsville and out west to Barcaldine. The North Queensland corridor has significant potential for demand from new economy minerals, including copper string 2.0, minerals processing, manufacturing and hydrogen. Achieving internationally competitive energy prices in the Northwest Minerals Province would mean 3,500 more jobs in North Queensland, delivering the minerals needed globally for batteries, renewables and electronics. In Central Queensland, there's potential for projects in the Fitzroy and Wide Bay renewable energy zones. These would make our aluminium and smelting industries more competitive, with strong potential as well for hydrogen development. In the southwest, the Darling Downs Renewable Energy Zone will meet demand from agricultural production and has the potential to help supply New South Wales. These renewable energy zones will support Powerlink to invest further funding and CleanCo to increase their publicly owned renewable generation capacity to deliver energy security. I don't want to just deliver renewable energy zones, I want to deliver industrial zones and hydrogen hubs, because that means more secure, full-time manufacturing jobs. In an increasingly uncertain global environment where supply chains are being broken, we must ensure that as a nation we have the capacity to make products locally. That means rethinking, and businesses and governments go overseas to manufacture and what we make here. Local companies have taken incredible initiative in the midst of the pandemic, making hand sanitizer, face masks and shields for export around our state, the country and the world. And under my government, we have grown manufacturing, including Rheinmetall's Military Vehicle Centre of Excellence that will support 450 direct jobs, helping make Queensland the largest vehicle manufacturer in the nation. Export distribution centres in Toowoomba and Cairns to boost agricultural exports. And the $60 million munitions manufacturing plant in Maryborough, supporting 100 manufacturing jobs. Keeping our population safe and our economy open is critical to attracting even more investment in manufacturing to Queensland, as is providing the gas needed as a feedstock for manufacturing. Queensland has unlocked 20,000 square kilometres of land for domestic gas supply. Today I can confirm that my government will commit $5 million to support a feasibility study into a gas pipeline from the Bowen Basin. This will support further gas supply for manufacturing while lowering carbon emissions from existing mines. And I would welcome a matching commitment from the federal government. Friends, while my government is mapping the way out, there remains very tough times ahead for many Queenslanders. This global pandemic isn't just claiming lives directly from the virus, it's taking a massive toll on Queenslanders' mental health. It's placing an enormous strain on many families. We are seeing more of our elderly become more and more isolated and more vulnerable. My government will provide an additional $46.5 million for localised mental health community treatment and support services. We want to provide the support so Queenslanders can make it through this. The endless coverage of what is happening in other parts of Australia and around the world is taking a toll on all of us. It is simply heartbreaking to watch. And we need to all be looking out for each other. Friends, while a tough journey remains ahead of us, there is no better place to navigate it from right here in Queensland. Despite the pandemic that has gripped our state for the past 8 months, I remain optimistic that Queensland's best days are ahead of us. And our greatest resource of all is our people, Queenslanders, and our ability to work together. And all of this is at risk, however, if we change course. The LNP have said they wouldn't listen to the expert health advice and would have opened up Queensland's borders. That would have meant forcing the closure of our economy or letting the virus through our population. Either way, that would have stopped our economic recovery in our tracks. I don't want to see Queenslanders' lives being put at risk, and I don't want our economic recovery put at risk. I want to be able to deliver on our strong plan to invest in the future of our great state. As Queenslanders know, if your home is hit by a disaster, you don't rebuild back exactly the way it was. You build back stronger, more resilient. You build back better than it was before. And that's what we all must do, so that we can come out of this with an economy that is growing faster than it has since before the GFC. So we can come out even stronger than we were before. We're in the fight of our lives, but I know that together we can get through this. If we work together, if we put Queenslanders first, if we work to get people back into work, and if we listen to the health and the expert advice, Queensland will get through this. Thank you.
Thank you for your address, Premier. As everyone's introduced me earlier, my name is Chris Rogan. I lead our government and health practices at PwC here in Queensland, and therefore have the pleasure of moderating a conversation with the Premier following that fantastic address. Thank you for that address, Premier. I think it was a lot of things for us to drill into there. You've used the boxing analogy a little bit, so I might pick up that thread if I can. First question, and as you all know, you're firing questions to us online, so I'm picking these up as we go. The first question I'd love to ask is, using that boxing analogy, you've been in a bit of a fight, and there's been a hell of a lot going on, and there's no rest that's been there, and it's now about 67 days until the election, which arguably we could call another battle, another fight. What will be your landmark promise to get the state growing again after the impact of the COVID pandemic?
Thanks, Chris. And I think every day is a fight, because every day we've got to get up and fight this virus, and we've got to fight to get people back into work. I think the biggest challenge that we all have is the economy, and to make sure that we can get people back into work and we can keep those great stabilisers of our economy continuing to function. I think I talked about the extraordinary work that all industries are doing with their COVID-safe plans, the record investment we have in capital infrastructure, but also too, we've got to keep up with the infrastructure in our health system and also with our education systems. That's the building of hospitals and schools across our state. And if we continue to keep that investment and working together, Queensland will get through this. What we've seen in other states, for example in Victoria, is the economy's had to absolutely close down, and that's had an impact on everybody. It's going to be a tough battle down there, and we do wish the Victorians all the very best. But the last thing we want in Queensland is to go backwards. We want to go forwards. So it is a fight. And it's a fight that not just everyone on my team is up for, but I think it's a fight that all Queenslanders are up for. And as I said, you can see that with all the testing and people coming out and getting tested when we do hear of cases in our community. And people are listening. So we'll get through it.
Thank you. The government has seen success managing COVID-19 cases and tracing, and you've touched on that in your speech and with the evidence of the results that we're seeing. And you've already touched on the fact that the challenge we're also facing now is the economic rebound. With such a decentralised state where the regions are so important to overall economic health in the state, what are some of the things the government is doing to support regional economies, building on what you've talked to us in your address about?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And the regional economies are absolutely crucial. A large part of our state being decentralised, and what we have seen is that the pipeline of infrastructure is happening, and you only have to look at what's happening from Cairns all the way down the east and out to the west. And people are putting forward their ideas for the future as well. And what strikes me is when I travel around Queensland in the last month or so, I have been able to get out more than I have been because of the pandemic, is that businesses are slowly getting the confidence back because Queensland is open for Queensland. I think that's the first mark we've got to get to, that Queenslanders feel confident about going out and about in their own communities, which is not the case in many, many other countries around the world. I think we're still hearing something like 5,000 cases a day, or 5,000 deaths a day across the globe. The virus is still out there, the pandemic is still there, but we have to keep resilient. And the manufacturing part of it as well, we are actually seeing Queenslanders do things differently. We've got a strong sector, a strong business sector, and the businesses are really pulling together during these tough times. But I don't want to underestimate too that many people have lost their jobs, and if there's anything that companies can do out there to put on an extra person, there are some government programs there to assist that. But key to that is the infrastructures. So you only have to see the record money we're spending in transport, in infrastructure, roadworks on the Bruce Highway, the over $1 billion in water infrastructure across Queensland. The tenders are about to be called for Rookwood Weir. That's something I know that Dr. Lynham's been focused on. We've got the Cairns Convention Centre about to be constructed up in Cairns. Townsville, we've built the stadium where Jeff Horn will be fighting next week, which is home to the mighty Cowboys. But there we're looking at the raising of the Burdekin Falls Dam. We've put in place the extra money for pipelines. This is about keeping people in work. If you've got this pipeline of work happening, then people have got security of jobs, but also too, businesses know that they can put people on to continue that work. And like I said, that $50 billion over 4 years, I think is the best commitment that a government can give to ensure that that construction is happening.
Thanks, Premier. Premier, CEDA recently undertook analysis of the Federation and published a post-pandemic playbook with recommendations to allow Australia's Federation to get things done, not just in a crisis, but in the interests of better long-term economic, social and environmental reform. How do you think governments take recent experiences and continue Commonwealth state momentum to restore community faith in the Federation and its capacity to be a strength rather than a weakness?
That's a really good question, and I think everyone was probably a bit sceptical of state-federal relationships before the pandemic. The annual COAG trip down to Canberra, we were very lucky that we were able to get COAG up to Cairns, the first time it actually met in a regional centre. But I think it became, COAG was just an opportunity for people to go and talk, and not much action would happen. I do want to say I think one of the best results of the way the states and the federal government interact has been the establishment of the National Cabinet. I think from memory, I think we've had over 27 meetings, and I think it's more meetings than COAG has had then over the last 8 or 9 years. And more has happened in those last 6 months by everyone working cooperatively and leaving the politics out the door, and just wanting to see the best for our country. And of course, you know, we will put forward different ideas and the Prime Minister can accept or reject it, but we have reached enormous consensus around that table about so many different ideas, whether that's working on issues to deal with small business, whether it's issues around housing, whether it's issues around environment, but most importantly, it's the issues of dealing with that health crisis. And in that early period, it was incredible to actually get the first-hand experience of hearing directly from Professor Murphy, who was attending all of those meetings, but also to get the great expert advice from Dr Young before I went to those meetings, and the Deputy Premier. And I do want to commend the Deputy Premier for the outstanding work he has done with the health response in this state as well.
Thanks, Premier. Yes, we've been very lucky with the health response and how well that's been coordinated. Premier, we might have touched on this in a small conversation at the table, but the notion of travel bubbles is a hot topic of conversation around many tables. Do you support the notional idea of travel bubbles between Australian states with low, no active spread of COVID cases to bolster the economy?
Okay, so I think we've got to take it from the premise that, and I addressed this today, we need national action where everyone is united on focusing on getting Victoria on top of their situation, and then New South Wales, because they still have a lot of untraceable experiences of COVID. So that is really important, because what we've seen in Victoria, it only takes 1 or 2 people for you to have a second wave. Now, we don't want to have a second wave here. So I have been absolutely listening to the expert health advice, and that expert health advice is that there are concerns where there is community transmission in other states. So we don't want to see that community transmission come here to Queensland. And that's why we took the tough measures of putting in place that hard border closure, initially with Victoria and then with New South Wales and the ACT. That means that people from the other states are free to come to Queensland. Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia and the Northern Territory. But until there is a national focus on Victoria and New South Wales, we cannot risk our health and the safety of Queenslanders. So what we have done is we've bent over backwards with some of those border bubbles around the New South Wales-Queensland border, where we didn't have to do that. So we went ahead and did that. The first thing I wanted to try and do was move that border to the Tweed River to enable those two communities to be connected. That was rejected by New South Wales. So we put in place a border bubble there so those communities that are connected can still move freely. But we will not change our advice until the health advice tells us that we can. Because it only takes one person. It only takes one person who comes with coronavirus into Queensland and spreads it, and then we're all in trouble and then we're experiencing a second wave. So Queenslanders have said to me that they want to keep enjoying their health here, they enjoy their economy being open here, and they enjoy their lifestyle. And there are things that are not being experienced in many other countries in the world at the moment. We are very, very fortunate, and we want to preserve that here in Queensland for as long as we possibly can.
Thanks, Premier. Without answering this question, I think this goes to what I thought was one of the fantastic announcements of your address regarding mental health. And the question goes to the unemployed and homeless, are the workforce needed to recover with borders restricted, a strong social infrastructure, foundation sustains, people waiting jobs. What are your plans in this area?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned mental health because it is such a huge issue, and I think every one of us knows someone that is going through a tough time at the moment. I am very concerned about a lot of our elderly people who are remaining at home and not going out, and we should encourage them to go out at this time. Just recently I had an email from someone mentioning that a lovely man who I went to school with at primary school had sadly lost his life a couple of weeks ago. And the email to me was essentially that COVID can take its toll on many people. So I think it's a duty for all of us to look for those signs. Like sometimes you might think the most bright and active person is fine, but underneath everyone is dealing with the stresses. Some people are watching what's happening overseas all the time on their iPads, and it can have these huge strains on people. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to ask, are you okay? Go and ask your friend, your family, your neighbours. Knock on, if you haven't seen the next door neighbour for a few days, go and knock on their door and ask them, are they okay? And this money, I think, will go a long way in helping our great supports of community mental health right across Queensland to actually help save people's lives. It's a very, very tough time, but I think all of us we all have to also display confidence and optimism that we will get through this. And I wake up every day feeling that we will get through it, and I'm inspired by the Queenslanders that I meet. So everyone in this room has their part to play.
Thanks, Premier. Time flies, so for any questions we've missed, I apologise. One final question, if we can, Premier. You have a large business audience here today, both personally and virtually, and it is great to be doing this in person. It feels weird, but it is great. You've seen both the best and worst of business during these times. What's some of the best you've seen, and what is your ask of business in the current climate?
I think the hardest thing for me to do was to do a press conference telling people they had to shut down, that they had to close. That's heartbreaking, and I think everyone felt that. Like, then you had to stay at home, then you were allowed to have 2 people come and visit maximum. Families weren't able to see each other. People weren't able to shake hands. They weren't able to hug. I mean, these are extraordinary times. But what we saw was local communities supporting each other. We saw restaurants suddenly doing takeaways. We saw families suddenly talking to their kids in parks. We saw parents taking an interest in what was happening in their son's or cousin's life. We saw the toll it took on aged care when people couldn't go and visit their loved ones. I couldn't go and see my grandmother. It took an enormous toll. And then I saw something quite incredible, and that was the resilience of Queenslanders. And I've seen it through floods and cyclones. I think we've been there, we've done that, but this was a new way of let's get on with it and let's get out there and fight. And I remember reading somewhere that they said you can't retreat from the virus. You've got to go and attack the virus. And I think that's what Queenslanders have done. And we saw companies that were producing alcohol who are now doing hand sanitizer. We saw companies in the south of Queensland now manufacturing masks. We saw universities saying, we want to help discover a vaccine. We saw people like Professor Young at UQ, talking with Kate Jones about how can we help to put money into finding a vaccine. We saw people suddenly wanting to manufacture and do things differently. I saw people exporting in Mackay, in a few other places that actually were putting on people because their goods were in such demand overseas. So a pandemic, it's shocking, but it's also given us an opportunity to look at who we are and think about how we can get through it better. And we've got a long way to go. I mean, we're all sitting here today, we're socially distant, we've got a COVID safe plan, but the convention centre's open again. We've got our people back at work. That's not the same in other countries. And I think because Queenslanders respond to cyclones and floods and bushfires, I think Queenslanders are responding to what's being asked of them, and we're getting through it.
So let's keep it going, Queensland, in summary. Premier, thank you very much for your time today and your address and your openness and frankness in answering those questions. I'd like to call Ross Thompson, Executive General Manager from Siemens, to the stage for our formal vote of thanks.
Firstly, thank you to Chris for the introduction and a particularly well-moderated session, and to the Premier for such a succinct and inspiring overview of the recent successes and current aspirational plans that the government has for the state's development in the months to come. I think the fighting analogy and the boxing analogy resonated particularly well with a number of Queenslanders in the room today. Thanks also to Professor Deborah Terry for your introduction earlier, and also to Clint O'Brien and the extended CEDA team for your ongoing coordination of these important events. It's a privilege to be able to provide the summation and vote of thanks to this forum and continue the long-standing relationship that Siemens has had with the Queensland Government and CEDA over the years. Siemens' positive influence on the economic development of Australia dates back 146 years to 1872, with the installation of the first telegraph line between Darwin and Adelaide. Closer to home, in Queensland, our involvement dates back 100 years, where we helped establish Brisbane's first telephone exchange, which ironically was during the Spanish flu period. Whilst Queensland has certainly changed quite significantly over the last 100 years, Siemens and our roughly 400 staff in the state have always been committed to helping future-proof the state by investing in the right people, the right technology, and the right partnerships, and we will continue to do so. Today, you'll find our technology in major hospitals across the state, in just about all major LNG projects from Roma to Gladstone, in a number of the largest power stations and renewable projects across the state, in most major freight networks and infrastructure projects like Brisbane Airport, and at the Australian Institute of Marine Sciences National Sea Simulator in Townsville. Most recently, the world first agri-power amorphous silica factory in Charters Towers has been built using CEMA's technology. Collaboration and investment in building technological capabilities are critical to our commitment to Queensland, which is why just over a year ago we announced a $450 million software grant to the University of Queensland. Since the grant, I'm proud to say that UQ has been a poster child for exploring the potential of the same software that organizations such as NASA and Maserati use in their daily activities. It's also particularly gratifying to see that since the grant announcement, over 2,000 students have already put the software to use. And in a true testament of industry collaboration, both the Queensland Brain Institute and Sustainable Minerals Institute are using the software to create simulations of real-life scenarios that will benefit the state of Queensland into the future. Another major initiative that I was talking to Professor Terry about a little bit earlier is the Energy Test Laboratory being developed by UQ, which will enable students to create digital twin simulations of power systems through Siemens hardware and digital grid software. On the back of the announcement of Queensland being declared a World Economic Forum Advanced Manufacturing Hub, which the Premier touched on briefly earlier, these manufacturing and energy test laboratories are going to help upskill students for Industry 4.0 and energy transition jobs of the future that don't actually exist yet. Queensland has always been a particularly innovative state, and even though 2020 has been a challenging year with COVID, we'll continue to see innovation as the mainstay of our state. There's now a greater reliance on digital and intelligent infrastructure than ever before. Pandemics force everyone's hand on being more effective and efficient. A transition to a digital and high-tech future has never been more urgent than it is now. The importance of innovation catalysts, such as the Advanced Queensland Initiative, has now become more clear than ever. In a time of crisis, opportunities are never far behind. Through the incubation and enhancement of new startup and scale-up solutions during this period, growing businesses can leverage off the additional support, which enables them to export their innovations to the world, and in turn makes both Queensland and Australia more competitive on the global stage. In closing, I would like to once again thank CEDA for continuing to provide the best possible platform to create an informed debate and discussion. CEDA continues to identify policy issues that matter for Australia's future and pursue solutions that deliver better economic, social and environmental outcomes for Australia and the states. I would like to once again thank and congratulate the Premier and her team for not only articulating a world-class vision of the future of Queensland, but for also so successfully navigating the tumultuous conditions that have presented themselves since the beginning of the pandemic. This particularly challenging period has uncovered a world-class leader in Anastasia Palaszczuk, much like Chancellor Merkel of Germany and Prime Minister Ardern in New Zealand. And it's particularly encouraging to see such strong leadership synergies within our very own state leadership structures right here in Queensland. So thank you. Thank you. If I can now ask Clint to come to the stage.
Thank you very much for that cleanest lectern in Brisbane. I swear I'm not texting. I have some poll results, which I'll get to in a second. But first, I wanted to thank you, Ross, for those comments and for your and all of Siemens' work with CEDA right around the country. And thank you as well, Chris, for getting up here and doing that today, for doing a really good job of it, for preparing for it. It's not an easy gig jumping on the stage with the Premier and asking her questions, and you did it really well, so thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge a member of CEDA's National Council on Economic Policy, Paul Simshouse AM. Paul snuck in and wasn't on my dignitaries list, but Paul's in the house, so g'day Paul, and thanks for being with us today. As I mentioned earlier, we did take a live poll from people here in the room and also in the virtual world. Hello again. And so let me read that to you. The question was, what do you think is the top priority to ensure economic recovery in Queensland? The first option was supporting employment growth and job creation at 31.7%, building vital infrastructure at 22.1%, strengthening Queensland's traditionally strong industries at 3.8%, investing in emerging industries and sectors in Queensland at 21.2%, skills and training and education at 8.7%, and investing in communities and health and mental health and wellbeing at 12.5%. So the good news on that front, Premier, is we couldn't have written that script any better for you, given the investments you've just outlined. So you're all over it. Well done. And thank you, Premier, for all of the work you've undertaken here in Queensland, for leading the state during this tough time. I'm sure it hasn't been an easy gig, so please accept our very best wishes from everybody here today. I'd also like to thank again our sponsors today, PwC Australia, Siemens, the University of Queensland, Westpac and Colin Biggers and Paisley Lawyers. CEDA will continue to investigate many of the issues that were raised here today, and you'll see that reflected in our now national program of work and part of our recovery series, which is ongoing. Up next for us though, CEDA live streams on prioritising social and affordable housing on the 25th of August, and the following day an update from new economic forecasts from NAB's chief economist Alan Oster. A little further ahead for us, some new thinking on the digitisation of human services, an area that CEDA is undertaking research on and making recommendations. If you'd like more information on any of those, please surf to www.ceda.com.au. If you'd like to know anything more about CEDA research, how you can collaborate with us, or know anything about our forward work, or indeed become a CEDA member, please do get in touch. Otherwise, for the guests in the room here today, know that there's a QR code on the tables there for you from which you can download the Premier's Economic Recovery Plan, and there are limited copies available at the door on your way out as well. Finally, thank you all for being back in the fold with us today and for taking the leap of faith, and by doing so, contributing to and supporting the work of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. Thanks very much. Go well. We'll see you soon.